Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Crypto Club and Digital Assets Weekly Catch-Up on Zoom. It is Sunday, the 26th of January, 2025, and already so far this year, very exciting in the crypto world with President Trump both being re-elected and also launching his own meme coin, Trump coin, which has been incredibly successful. We talked about it last week and it went up from $0 to $75, back down to about $28 now. Lots of regulation coming through with CBDCs and stable coins, but who knows what's going to go on in the rest of the year. Could be really exciting times ahead. For those who've not been to one of these sessions before, we talk about whatever the audience wants to talk about. So completely unknown what we're going to end up covering. Quite often though, it's going to be blockchain, DeFi, NFTs, ICOs, TGs, also sorts of other three-letter acronyms really. Sometimes we talk about people's projects, what they're working on, the intersection of the metaverse and AI, VR, AR, lots of exciting things. So do stick around. There's going to be something for everybody in this, novice and expert alike. Let's see who's going to come and join us today and what we're going to talk about. Hey, Gabriella, welcome back.
Hello, Gary. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We've got a couple of other people coming in at the moment. So hello to Stuart as well. Hi, Stuart.
Hi there. I'm speaking from San Francisco.
Excellent. Anywhere in particular in San Francisco?
East Bay.
Okay.
San Ramon, Dublin area.
Very, very, very nice. Okay. Used to troll through the area quite often. So excellent.
Oh,
Well, welcome aboard. In fact, thanks for joining us today.
well, thank you for the invite.
No problem. We've just been joined by Daniel as well. Hi, Daniel.
Hello there. Hi.
Good morning, good afternoon,
Morning.
or good evening, wherever you're calling from, Daniel.
Yes, thank you. I'm calling from UK, so it's
Okay.
evening.
We get a real mix because we get some people dialing in occasionally from Australia, so it's like
Oh
very early in
wow.
the morning from them, ranging through, as Stuart's just saying, he's West Coast US, so
Oh wow.
pretty. What's that? Early afternoon for
It's
you, Stuart?
11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, so that's not so bad then. And we've got Gabriella in Spain, so it's probably about, what is it, about 8 p.m. for you, Gabriella? Late evening?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
cool.
Mhm.
Then we've got Dan, who, if I remember correctly, is from the UK, so nice and local. That's good. And we've just been joined by Estelle as well. Hey, come on, Estelle. Don't just type it. Come and join on the call and say hello. But we can see you smiling. That's always good. I do always
Hi,
welcome people.
everyone.
Hey, hello.
Made it.
Hi
Great.
there.
Hey, there we go. We can actually see you as well. Fantastic. Welcome aboard. So lots of new faces and some old faces as well. Leave your cameras on if you want to. Turn them off if you don't want to. That's not a problem at all. It is always nice to see the faces and expressions, though. For anyone who's not been on any of these calls before, never know quite what we're going to be talking about, to be honest. Completely depends on who shows up, what's going on in the news, what people are interested in. But certainly as a starting point, be interested just to know what people's interests are, and what brings them along. Stuart, maybe you could open up and just introduce yourself and say a little bit more about where your interest is. Oh, and you're on mute at the moment.
It always helps when you take that mute button off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God, what have I just said?
It's so 2020, that saying, isn't it? If you're on
Yeah.
mute, but
Yes.
we still do it. So
Don't
go on,
make me
Stuart.
feel old.
Tell
Okay.
us a bit more then.
Okay. Originally born in England, lived in England, grew up in England, been around the world, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Pakistan, Greece, Venezuela, Panama, Miami, and then to San Francisco, all places I've lived. I'm now president of a blockchain company, which is the first one to offer scaling, and we should be going public in, I would say about 8 weeks. And I'm in charge of innovation and research. I'm actually a businessman. I've got some technical ability, but not too much. I used to head up technology for Bank of America in
Wow.
Latin America and Middle East as well at some point in life. and I've also worked for Citibank and things like that. But I originally started in England as a telephone technician.
Okay.
So my interests, keeping it narrow to this, is crypto, obviously, AI and where it's going futuristically, and a lot of other little bits and pieces, real world assets, and how those can be digitized and split up and so on.
Okay, so the real growth of what's commonly known as RWA is our real world assets.
Real world assets.
The whole
yes.
tokenization piece. That's fascinating. We'll maybe come back in a little while and talk a little bit more about the blockchain stuff and the scaling then, because that's always an important feature and something that blockchain seem to struggle with a little bit. So thanks for sharing the insights there, Stuart. Really interesting stuff and fascinating history as well. So let's go on. Estelle, as you were kind enough to join us, you care to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your interest is?
Oh, hi everyone. So my name is Estelle. So I'm here tonight, well, obviously, because I've got some interest in crypto and all the whatnot and everything else that is going on in the market. I'm not having such an impressive journey as to it, so, but I've been working on a lot of multi-billion-pound projects where basically myself, I've been looking at all the different systems and technology that was used throughout basically the different phase of the project. Reason why I'm here, well, I would love to know more about blockchain and crypto and how all this can assist basically in, you know, in software application. And that's kind of it, really.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. Whereabouts are you based, Estelle?
I'm in London, so
okay.
I'm UK based, but I am originally from Belgium.
Okay, excellent. Well, welcome aboard. Anyway, so let's keep going around the table, so to speak. Then, so we've got Daniel who's joined us. Daniel, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi there. I'm actually I'm based in UK in Leicester. I work in the healthcare profession, and I've been investing into stocks, equities, and more recently in the past few years into crypto. So my interests are in crypto. I've developed, I've been investing during the downtrend, during the bear market. So I had a strategy where I previously invested into the previous cycle, but I was timed it wrongly, and since then I've just kept that interest going and carried on investing, a bit of trading as well on the side, just to kind of reduce my average cost, and then I've just continued with that cycle, kept that interest going. But I would like to learn more about blockchain and further advance other than just investing. So yeah, that's where I am.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that, Daniel. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a minute as well, because that ties in nicely with some of the stuff that Stuart and Estelle and Daniel have been saying already. But just really quickly, Dan, I know you've shared who you are in the past. I know you got a keen interest in insurance and blockchain and that, but I don't know if you just want to say a few words and say hi.
Yeah, hello everyone. So a little bit about me. I'm Dan. I'm full-time in insurance broker, quite fresh in the industry, but 2 or 3 years. It's still probably quite fresh. But I've always had quite a big interest in innovative projects and technologies. And about 2.5 years ago, I spoke to someone at a networking event who was heavily into crypto, and from there I kind of it lit a light bulb in my head and came on Gary's calls a couple of years ago, and I don't pop in as much as I do when I first started researching crypto, but I really like to get on these calls, and I love to see what other people who have the same interests as me think about this ever changing market and space, because it changes every day and there's something else to talk about every couple of days. And for me, I just absolutely love to hear what other people have got to say about it. So they're my interests, but I'd also love to see how the blockchain and cryptography can really affect our world, because I think there's some potential there.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks, Dan. And that probably links nicely. I'll quickly give a little bit of background on myself, because it ties in, and then maybe Annie and Shine, if they want to say who they are on that. But my kind of background, I got interested in blockchain and distributed ledger technology probably around about 2014, 2015, so 10 years or so. And I found the whole concept of it really fascinating, and particularly its potential for doing things like traceability, tracking, immutable ledgers, all this kind of stuff, and identity management as well. I tried to stay away from crypto, as in cryptocurrencies, for about 12 months, and then inexorably got drawn into it. You can't escape from it, that they are linked. But what that means is that I'm more interested in the technology evolution, not about prices going up and down. So that to me is still a diversion in some ways. I'm really interested in the technology. And then as I got into cryptocurrency a little bit more, I felt very nervous. So, setting up a wallet and making payments and doing transfers, like, am I doing this right? And how do I save my keys? And what is a private key in there? And that's why I originally set up a crypto group locally in my local town. And then when the lockdowns kicked in, we went online, and that's where we are several years later. So running this each week. And I love it, because it means that we get people joining us from all around the world who are all at different levels of experience. Everyone is always learning something. And I believe anyone who thinks they've stopped learning just aren't picking up stuff. So I find it fascinating. But talking of learning in that, maybe Annie, you want to say hi and share a little bit?
Yes, thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate the opportunity. Well, nice to meet everyone. So yes, my name is Annie, originally from Malaysia, but I've lived in the UK for 30 years. So I'm actually more British than anything else. So that is how long I've lived here. And where exactly I'm based now is I'm actually based in Cambridge, but because of job movement, so basically I move where opportunity comes. So if the next job opportunity is somewhere else, so I might be in another place as well. So you never know. Why I get into blockchain, it's actually the reason I joined this group is because of my interest in blockchain. I've been to multiple networking events, and one of the networking events was about blockchain, actually, Web3, blockchain, and AI. So that was the content of that networking that I went to, which basically makes me think, oh, I need to learn more about this blockchain. Same thing, I'm not quite sure about cryptocurrency. I never be sure of it. And this week, in the last week, I was in 2 different events, as in like online chat, either LinkedIn or some other sort of webinar session. And it's very clear, one of the presenter basically saying that getting involved in crypto is like you're going into a casino. I've never thought of that. So I learned something new because of this group, actually. So I'm very grateful to all the contribution that other people have made. And the other contribution that I would have wished that it will come back here is there's this guy who did set up blockchain and Web3 in I think it was in an African country where all the underprivileged children managed to get access to internet. I was just thinking, I wish that he would come back to this forum and elaborate more, but I don't think I have seen him since. So no, thank you, Gary.
No problem. We get real mix, and sometimes we get people who join us who they're working on something really fascinating, and then they kind of disappear And it's a real shame when that happens. But yeah, this is where I think the potential of blockchain. I've seen it go through several cycles already. There's the hype and the excitement, and whenever crypto prices go up, everyone gets into it, and then it dies away. And that. So that's why I was interested, Stuart. We'll come back and talk maybe a bit more about blockchain work you're doing, because I still think the industry needs to get the foundations right. Before it tries to build things on top of it. So you were talking about the project that you're involved in at the moment, Stuart. Are you able to share a little bit more about exactly what it's doing and what it's looking to
Yes, I
achieve?
can. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things which blockchain has failed to deliver is a killer app. And the reason for it is because it's not scalable. And if you look at what industry and enterprise is looking for, they're looking for something that's going to give them provenance. Everyone likes that, especially in pharma and so on. But they want to keep throwing transactions at it. Well, Bitcoin can't do that. You know, one transaction every 7 to 14 minutes. Ethereum is incredibly expensive and doesn't scale. You have to go up to a level 2 to try and get any speed, and that means that your data is separated from your transaction, and that's got its own issues. And no one's really solved the way of doing it. We came along about 6 years ago, and we've been under development for just over 6 years. We started using object-oriented programming. So anyone who's got gray hair may remember that. And essentially what we've done is everything that the blockchain touches has got an ID. Now, what the heck does that mean? Let's take an auto manufacturer. Let's take Ford. I think Ford's still in England, is it?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay. Let's say they have a gearbox, and they're going to source the gears from somewhere in Malaysia. And they're going to get the casing from somewhere in Colombia. Well, that's all well and good. It all gets shipped. Everything's tracked. They've got tickets. They've got systems that can follow the shipping and so on. It's all assembled, hopefully in England, to give the English some work. And 2 years later, second gear goes on 200 cars. So now they've got a recall. The problem is Ford do not know how broad that recall is. Mm-hmm. So they recall everything from 2019 to 2025. A lot of cars. What we're saying on the blockchain now is if you have all your supply chain on the blockchain, I can go back and I can say in Malaysia, these gears were made by ABC company. And they got their steel from, China. They got it from the Chinese, okay. But that batch where we're seeing the cars break down are VIN numbers from so-and-so to so-and-so. Well, when we track everything on the blockchain, everything's got a number and it's all related. So I can go to the VIN numbers and say, give me the provenance of the gearboxes and their assemblies starting in 2021 to 2022. And I can narrow down the VIN numbers and I can go back down the blockchain and look who supplied that gearbox, who supplied those gears, where did the steel come from, who milled it, who assembled it, and so on. So now I've got the ability to greatly narrow down my recall. That's worth a lot of money to someone like Ford, a lot of money. Now take, for example, the aircraft industry. When you have an overhaul of an aircraft engine, they have to put every separate part in a bag and label it. And I don't think they put the propeller vanes in bags, but they have to label it. And they've got to check against the database how old that part is and whether it can be reintroduced into reassembled engine. Well, guess what? People like Boeing lose about $27 million worth of parts a month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a conservative figure because they lost, where did that bag go? Did someone see it? They have to get another part from the warehouse. But just tracking those parts, who took it off, when it came off, what engine it was done, that can save them probably, if they're losing 27, they can probably save 25 million a month. Well, all of a sudden, that's got a value. And what we're doing it is by giving every single object that ever touches that blockchain a unique number. And we've got it, I think it's 2 to the power of 84 or something. It's a big number, so we don't think we're going to run out of numbers. We're able to track it all the way through. And Ford, through its supply chain, for example, is able to track all the way back to the original material. And that's where you're starting to see interest in the blockchain, other than DeFi, where I send you, Gary, £20 and you get it and you say, thank you very much. I'll convert it from USDC to pound sterling. Thanks for paying me.
Stuart,
go ahead.
I understand how you see that being done differently on the traceability and everything with it being blockchain. The reason I ask is that you overlap on two sectors I've worked in. So aviation, I actually took a look at an aircraft manufacturer's inventory management system. I won't say which company it was, but sorry?
You're too polite.
Yeah, but their inventory management system at the time handled everything from like a 13mm bolt right the way up to a completed airplane. Okay, it covered the full spectrum. So they literally had hangars on site which had the airplane in storage and warehouses with units and everything. Their inventory management system at the time was 48% accurate, which basically meant for those who don't get the statistics on that, you could walk into the parts department and say, hello, have you got a metric altimeter which is TSO approved and everything, blah, blah, blah. And the guy would look on the computer and it would say yes. And he'd walk into the warehouse and he couldn't find one because there wasn't one in stock. You could literally toss a coin and be more accurate, right the way up to a fully functioning, completed aeroplane. It was that bad. So I saw that years ago, and we introduced a load of stuff to improve that. And in terms of the traceability, I worked in pharmaceuticals for a number of years. So as you're saying that the problems with tracing up through your bill of materials, where there's been some raw material problem upstream or something, we had exactly that, because the problem is if a manufacturer's made some raw ingredients outside of specification in some way, and then that gets mixed into your product and then it gets distributed, people die. And so we used to have to do in our traceability where, you know, within 24 hours, we could identify right the way from the raw materials production through its generation through the factory, manufacturing plants and everything like that, right the way through to which chemist stocked the packet of whatever the product was, you know, painkillers or whatever. So we've had this challenge for years. And, you know, but people put technology in, but how is blockchain solving it any differently, do you think?
I think it's solving it differently because at each juncture where something happens, it's got to go onto the blockchain. It's got to be recorded. Now, you know, garbage in, garbage out is always going to be there. But if it's your job to say, I'm buying this material from XYZ company, boom, you know, here's 100 weight of bullion or 100 weight of steel. Do we use 100 weight? Let me go into metric kilograms. Sorry. I left England before they changed to the metric system, so I still think in
I'd imagine with metals, having worked in the commodities industry as well, it's probably kilotons these days.
Kilotons. I'm just trying to give an example. So at each point, people are more incented to, because they're not going to get paid unless they can show that they've shipped that material. So their incentive, if they want to get paid by their boss, is usually to put material into the system. So if it goes into the system, as it goes up the chain, it links its ID because each part has got an ID. So the end result is a motor car with its own ID. Now, that motor car may be made up of 40,000 parts. And being able to trace it on the blockchain is something that you can do using technology that takes 5 minutes. It doesn't take overnight. Now, let's take pharmaceuticals. And you know, in the I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but in the pharmaceutical industry, you have to go through a period where you're testing your drugs. And whatever that test is, you have to give to the FDA or whichever the approving authority is. And sometimes that takes 5 to 7 years because you've got to run through mice and guinea pigs and beagles and all sorts of things, whatever you're doing. Being able to load that onto the blockchain with results of tests, you don't have to have a folder that's 6 inches thick that you give to the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. I don't know what it is in the UK anymore. But,
it's the MHRA. Yeah.
Okay, MHRA. So you can say it's on the chain. Now, they can scan it, they can look at it. Yes, those were the results. And at each point, you've got the provenance because it's time and date stamped. And you can't change it because it's immutable. So you've now got the pharmaceutical industry looking at this and saying, that's worth a lot of money to us because we lose results sometimes and we have to go back and retest. And the FDA said, well, what about this thing in 2022 where you said, well, no, you don't say anything. Well, now you can pinpoint that in seconds rather than wait for a year and a half for them to come back to you.
Is there a risk you're solving a problem that people don't want to solve, though?
Yes,
I ask that because I am aware of what goes on in the pharmaceuticals industry, right away from phase 0 trials, which is the inject the creature and see if it dies or not, right the way through to phase 3, which is the scale deployments and everything. And people, because I've been through this cycle a couple of times now with blockchain and with pharmaceuticals, where people go, "Oh yeah, we'll record all CTMS, so the clinical trials management system. We'll record all results, and it's in an immutable form. It's all accessible and everything." Sometimes, if the results don't work out the way they want, the pharmaceutical company does not want people to see that data.
You mean just like COVID-19?
I'm not going to go there.
Okay, there's a good example.
But yeah, BNT 162b2 and all this kind of thing. The traceability on those, you're right. That in theory, the ability to be able to track and trace through and see the efficacy and everything is very, very powerful. However, it may lead to producing results that they might not want. And in fact, a lot of people don't realize that the reason at times that pharmaceuticals are so expensive is, first of all, because they've got a very long life cycle. You know, a product from new molecule development to being on the shelf can easily be 7 to 10 years. And during that time, there's a very high probability it will fail. So most new products never make it to market. And they don't make it to market either because they don't have the desired efficacy, which is effectively how efficiently it works, or it doesn't. Or it might have side effects, or there might be something else about it. A lot of the time, the drugs companies do not want that published because what they might subsequently want to do is repurpose a molecule to do something else. So this is the fascinating thing, that actually a lot of the industry does repurposing of products. So the old one that everyone probably knows about is Viagra. Originally was a product for, if I remember correctly, cardiovascular problems. And they discovered after a while that not only did it address the cardiovascular challenges, but it had certain other effects as well that they decided were pharmacologically advantageous to people who had certain issues. So they repurposed it, and it became an impotence drug as well. Now, the problem is, if you've got a product that you've put through a trial in somewhere and it had some side effects that you didn't want people to know about, that would then prevent you from starting another project to see if it could be worked for something else. So I find it interesting, Stuart, because I think it's an example where at first you think, oh, this is great, we can capture all of this. But actually, the industry doesn't always want you to.
No, your point is very well made. And the other big sinkhole where people don't want all of the information to be out there, it's called government.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden, what you're doing is you're making things transparent. Now, one of the things that we've realized is that you can do that, but we've got private enclaves. So, for example, if you were Merck and you were doing a drug, you could keep that in a private enclave and it's encrypted anyway. So you're not going to let anyone into that. But if you want to come out of it and show the MRH, whatever it is there, FDA here, you can open it up at a suitable point. But it's not necessarily public.
Mm-hmm.
So the creation of private enclaves to us is very as well.
And that's certainly an approach. That's definitely good. I just want to see if anyone else wants to join in the conversation, either around this or on a wider thing. Because Annie, I saw you nodding with great interest there. Was something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Gary and Stuart. I really appreciate that, Stuart. So I'm interested, my question would be to Stuart. I'm interested in how do you practically make sure that the data at each point actually enter the blockchain? Because what does it stop somebody still do what they do, like taking something out of a warehouse without putting a note or whatever? For example, is it because if they scan a barcode, does that automatically go into the blockchain, or they still have to enter some sort of a computer system in order to get the data in?
And what we do is make them turn around twice and hold up their thumbs. It's however you want it to be. So, for example, let's say we've got a guy in China, in Shenzhen, who's putting together a box full of electronic parts to ship. He's going to ship 100 of them. They've either got to be scanned in, a match, or he doesn't get paid. Because if he ships something, it's got to be on the chain. That's got to go against something. So in accounting, if you think, money in, money out, he wants to be paid. Believe me, that gets people's attention. So he can scan each one of those and only put 99 in there, but he's only going to have 99 barcodes or whatever you've set up. And the granularity of how you count is going to be up to the buyer and the seller. So, for example, if I'm selling ants, people do buy ants. I'm not going to barcode each ant. I'm going to sell it by weight, maybe. I'm going to sell it by approximate population. But in most cases, it's a very finite object. And if I make an object, I want to get paid for it. That's why I'm in business. So I'm incented to scan it in, or however we're going to do it, whether I'm going to take the number and put it in there. As soon as it goes in my system, I produced it. It's now gone on to the inventory of the buyer. And it's also on my inventory. Now, when the buyer says, okay, I'm going to take box A into my inventory, it would then generate something to accounts payable to pay me. my inventory would have gone down by 100 or one box, and my accounts receivable is now looking to be paid for that. So it's a question of matching up a number of things for the user. Now, the blockchain is an enabler. It's not the app. That's the important thing. So you can make it as simple or as sophisticated as you really want to. But the data is on the chain, whether you want to present that graphically, whether you want to present it in a table, whether you want to present it in your accounting system, is up to you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense at the point where there is a financial gain. So let's say if it is in the factory situation, I think you were talking about maybe, okay, how about car manufacturer then? So let's say on the production line,
yep.
Somebody would have to register, okay, I put this engine into car A, I put engine B into car B. So that sort of thing. So what would be the thing that motivate people to make sure that it's actually being registered? Because otherwise, like you say, when you have a recall, you do not know which model or which exact car to recall. But if every single item is actually traceable as to which car it exactly is, then you only recall that particular car. That, I think that is where I'm thinking, you know, what motivates employee to make sure everything is noted?
Mainly in a car factory where you put in engine A into car A. Engine A is lifted in with a robot. So by the time it's got to be in assembly, it's already got a number. It knows where it's going. The final assembly is the car, and that's the final number. If you were to look at it on a spreadsheet, for example, you'd see 1 being the car, 2 the gearbox, 3 the engine, 4, and then it'll keep going down the parts in each one, and it just explode and explode and explode and explode till you get to the supplier. So what you're doing is at some point on the factory floor, it's taken over by robots anyway. They've got an assembly, they've got a bar, they're measured on how many engines they put in, because you can't slip an engine into your pocket, take it home for kids. So there's a certain amount of provenance and security there where it actually comes in, and they know how many engines came in the front door, how many cars go out the other door. They don't say, oh, well, 1 engine's short here. Whereas generally don't do that.
I think the other thing maybe to add, so I did some stuff for the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply many years ago, and that was all around a thing called procure to pay. So it's the whole idea of when a company places an order with another company, and then that other company goes off and manufactures it, or supplies it, whatever. There are ways of doing the whole provenance and capture, as you describe, Annie, and it might be using these days QR codes rather than barcodes, because QR codes are slightly richer in the amount of data they can hold, or even NFC tags for some things if they're higher value. But what you find as well is that most industries have got standards around data capture anyway. So going back to pharmaceuticals, you've got things like GCP, GLCP, so that's good clinical practice, good manufacturing practice, GMP. And in the manufacturing sector, you've got things like MRP systems, so the manufacturer resource planning systems. And as Stuart says, a lot of it's automated now anyway. So it's a matter of just getting the robot to capture the things. So I think we are there. And in terms of incentivization, if there are still human beings involved, and it's funny that Stuart mentioned Ford before. So I actually visited the Ford plant in Liverpool in the UK when it was automated, and they rolled out all robots and everything. And it was a fascinating sight to watch the robots lifting these chassis and rotating them, putting them together and moving them along the production line. And about every 50 feet or so, there was a blue boiler-suited person sitting reading a newspaper. right the way along the production line, every 50 feet, there'd be this guy sitting there. And we said, oh, what's the purpose of these people? Because they just seem to be reading the newspaper. It's like, oh, well, they're quality control technicians to make sure that the robot's doing everything it should do and capturing everything and reporting everything. And we said, oh, that's fascinating. How often do the robots get it wrong then? And they said, oh, never. They're automatic, the robots. They always get it right. So why have you still got the people then? And they said, oh, it was a union deal. The union said we have to employ these people, otherwise they wouldn't let us put robots in. But the point being that generally there are ways to systemize and automate the quality of the data to make sure it is valid, definitely. So, but yeah, that said, you've still got garbage in, garbage out, and that's where you do have to put the controls in. And the greatest way of overcoming controls is to involve human beings, because they'll always try and take the shortest routes to try and get something done. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right, JT.
So this conversation took me back to 2018, 17, you know. I remember I met in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, a guy, his name was Andres or Andre, or he's a German guy. He was the head of blockchain for BMW. Already talking about all of these, you know, they already were looking at these, they're already implementing these systems, internally. But the biggest, I mean, we've been through this several times, Gary, over the years. The biggest problem that I see, and we know that IBM was working on a lot of stuff, you know, and that big supermarket group in the US, what's it called?
Wallmart.
Walmart, they had right provenance right down to the farmer, you know, tracking several products to supermarket. The biggest problem that I see, and I had this discussion with that guy from BMW and say, one thing you're going to struggle in all of this is actually the movement of raw materials. I mean, you can track right down to the one part of the car, yeah? But the raw material, you only spot 1 or 2 or 3 years later that because something starts to break in the cars, because it was the raw material was used or a mix of them, created some weak parts, for example, in the car, yeah? And yes, you have quality control, but you know, it fails sometimes, the quality control, yeah? And when you then find out that there is a problem, you know, it's very hard to track down the movement of those raw materials, because a lot of times you just get it from subcontractors, and then some bring one material from China mixed with another material from Russia, you know, whatever, yeah? And then goes to the foundry, creates all of those parts. I mean, it's quite complex, you know, and the usual example was given at the time, I still recall, there's a lot of people talk about this. Think about fish that ends up in your plate, yeah? Imagine that you have to track through the entire supply chain. Do you think that's going to be right at the source, the fisherman tagging something that this fish came from here? When it gets to the aggregators, it's like what happens with the raw materials, the same, yeah? And then it just gets mixed, yeah? So you don't know really which was the fisherman that actually was providing the fish to that batch. It's really hard to track right down to the entire supply chain. So that's why that guy from the abdomen say, often we just recall the entire, you know, over 1, 2, 3 years, whatever it is, that we start to spot these things. We recall all of these cars because we can't track. It's very hard for us to track down right to the raw materials, who's actually providing those raw materials to create that specific part that failed, you know, and we only spotted 3 years later. Yeah. So it's not a universal thing. Yes, we can do it. Maybe in some cases you can, but I don't think it applies to everything, you know. Still,
I was going to offer as well. This just shows how many industries I've worked in. That another sector that was looking at this was about traceability of wine or of alcohol products. So everyone's going, oh yeah, if we can prove the provenance of a bottle of wine, you know, high value and everything. The problem is you can trace the provenance of the bottle. And I used to work for a wine company who actually made their own bottles, so that they knew the glass production and everything like that. But when you're doing something like the origination of a bottle of wine, do you trace that back to the grape that was involved? And literally, which batch was the grape crushed and all this kind of thing. And it introduces some things, and it's where you find that there's a point at which you can't go beyond a certain level. So Stuart,
it's not cost effective as well.
Yeah.
Well,
so
let me address that. Go ahead.
I was quickly going to say this is where you end up batching things, and you trace the batches.
Yes.
That is a compromise, but tends to work.
Yeah,
Stuart, please add that.
Yeah, Gary, I'm impressed by all the experience you've got at 25 years old.
My beauty filter is obviously working well this evening.
That's right. I think what JT is saying is there comes a point at which the economics are not worth doing to trace it. However, I would say I've seen it in action because on the San Francisco Bay Bridge, not the Golden Gate, the Bay Bridge, they had some quality control, and the steel was coming from China, and the mix of the steel was incorrect. And they were able to trace it down to the manufacturer and where it was coming from. So it's a question of value, and a lot of people don't see the value of doing certain things, and you've got this batch approach. But what you have now is, instead of paper, you're storing the information electronically, which a lot of people weren't doing 5-10 years ago. So now you've got the ability that you can force that fisherman, and maybe we only do it down to the boat, and the boat usually knows where he goes, but 3 years, does he keep the logs for 3 years? No, he probably doesn't. Could there be technology on board that keeps the log? Yes, that's easy. But it's a question of what the industry wants. Now, if one of the big food companies, Kraft, came out and they poisoned half of California, you bet they would be tracking. You bet there'd be some heads rolling, and there'd be inquiries, and about 2 years later, you would see people tracking down to the cow, so where things came from. So a lot of this is driven not by industry wanting to be good, it's driven by industry. The accounting side is, can we make it faster, cheaper, quicker?
Mm-hmm.
And can we beat our competitors to it? The other side of it is, it's working well. We don't have to do anything until the government steps on their hands and says, we've got your attention now because there's been some calamity or problem. And those are the only two things that drive the industry, or any industry.
I think that's fair, absolutely. It's a really good discussion. And again, it comes back to this is why I like the idea of blockchains for traceability and this kind of thing. But I do still see these use cases reappearing every few years. And as was mentioned earlier on, Wallmart, that I've forgotten what the name of the project was now, but it was to trace green goods, basically. So I think they did it with mangoes to begin with. And I heard some really interesting statistics that they went into a Walmart store. So in the UK, we don't have Walmart anymore, but we have Asda, which at one point was owned by Walmart. And they just went over to a shelf, picked up a container of mango, which was like shrink wrapped and everything. And they said, right, tell me where this came from. And the original way they did it, they spent several weeks trying to trace back, which container it had been in, so which shelf it had been on in the warehouse, which supply chain it had come through, which country, blah, 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 blah. And it took them about 2 weeks, apparently, to work out where this mango had originally came from. They implemented the food tracking thing for the green goods on mangoes, and that got that traceability down to within seconds, that they could actually track it down to see not only its supply chain route, but which farm it had come from, when it had been picked, everything. And that was phenomenally powerful. Yeah. I think the problem was that trying to work out what actual commercial advantage it gave them. So there was a thought about 5 years ago, you start putting the whole traceability on a QR code on every single pack, so that as a customer, you can walk into the store, you can get your phone out, and you go, where did this really come from? And for a while, everyone thought that was a brilliant idea. And then they realized most consumers don't actually care. You know, as long as it's ethical and it's not come from a sweatshop or something like that, the idea of actually tracing your mango back to the plantation it came from and everything just wasn't there. So interesting stuff.
They care more.
Well,
They care more about the Trump coin and all of that stuff. You're right.
Sorry, I just wanted to close that off really. Really interesting discussion. And I think it comes back, as Stuart kind of alluded to as well, it has to offer a sufficient benefit, either of a financial or speed benefit to the organization involved in it, or a regulatory compliance thing. And it always comes back to the two drivers for businesses are profitability or risk of going to prison. Yeah,
Correct.
And somewhere in that. That's good. Sorry, I realised we were joined by Thessie before. I just wanted just before we finished off, Thessie, you joined us later on. Didn't get a chance to say hello and get you to introduce yourself if you're still listening to this. And this is where Thessie has now gone away. This often happens. I say to people, "Oh, just introduce yourself," and they either don't come off mute or they disappear or whatever. So, okay, then we've got 10 minutes left. Anything?
Sorry, I didn't mean to go on mute. I mean, I was on mute. I just couldn't unmute. Yeah, hi, my name is Tessie Merain, and actually the topic is quite interesting. I don't even know where I found out about this meeting, but I worked on the first implementation on the blockchain of provenance tracking for with consensus in New York for BHP Billiton in 2016. And we were tracking the drill bits when they were like doing drilling in the oceans, and this was like to find actually the drill bits in the future, because part of it would go to research and analysis and be matched with the records. And generally the issues, of course, exactly what you talked about, is for first mile, last mile problems, the input of the initial data, particularly on rigs, and then where it's not easy to even work, and then also continuously to make sure that the inputs are proper and matching what's actually happening. So that's usually the big spot in anything in that type of a system.
And I think that's a really good point as well, that having worked in the oil sector, for the cost of a drill bit breaking is substantial, isn't it? So the focus really is not about tracking and tracing it, it's about fixing it. And that's what matters to them, kind of thing. Because the sheer downtime of not being able to pump oil or whatever the product is, it just makes that so critical. Thanks for that, Thessie. And it shows as well.
Sure.
Companies have been doing this for 10 years and more. And we still haven't quite cracked it in some ways. So, welcome aboard on that. Anyway, that's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Just opening it up again. Anyone got any other thoughts? It doesn't necessarily have to be about the whole provenance and supply chain and that. It is an area that I find fascinating, though. I've looked at some companies like Everledger, who I used to say were the poster child of traceability. Everledger was a startup that used to trace diamonds. In fact, they still do. And it was the whole idea that they traced diamond from the extraction from the mine in South Africa or wherever, through to its first polish in Mumbai, through to its final polish in Rotterdam, through to it actually being set in a ring or whatever in London, where it would then be sold. And they did the whole traceability of that. So that was very, very useful, because there's a thing, for those who don't know about the diamond industry, there's a thing called the Kimberley process, which is about making sure that diamonds haven't come from blood, that they're not known as blood diamonds, so conflict diamonds. So some countries where there's a lot of war and conflict, they don't like it if you take diamonds out, because that is taking the value from the country in there. So Everledger did an amazing thing of doing the whole traceability of a diamond from the original when it was extracted right the way through to it being sold, and then actually having that as an app on a mobile phone. So if you were the happy fiance who had this wonderful final diamond, you actually had the traceability of it on your mobile phone, so you could show it off to people and say, this is where it came from there. So that I found fascinating. And we were talking about fish before. There was a company in the UK called provenance.org, and they actually tracked tuna stocks, funnily enough, for exactly the things we were saying about before. And they tracked high value fashion goods as well. So it's interesting. I think LVMH, so Louis Vuitton, announced a little while ago, they were producing their own traceability and linking it in with the metaverse as well, funnily enough. And again, the ability to track to prove that this handbag didn't come from sustainable sources and everything. So yeah, I find this whole area fascinating. There's also an insurance link on this, which is where Dan's ears may prick up, that the whole thing that if you can track and trace the provenance of materials, you can insure them. And so there was a big project that happened a few years ago in the insurance sector about as goods went from the manufacturer's factory to the port onto the ship and then dispatched off the ship and everything like that, where the operators would have to fill in like bill of materials forms and all documentation associated with export and everything. That would all go on the blockchain. And then trade finance would be arranged against the ownership of the asset at each point, and insurance. So there was a project called Trade Lens, which I think IBM and Maersk Shipping and a few others were involved in.
They can that because one of the things that wasn't happening is there was no composability on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't link the shipment with the insurance. They were two totally different things, and they just didn't know how to do it, because we talked to IBM and they wanted our solution, but we weren't ready at the time. But that's one of the things we're bringing is composability, so that you can put different things together that in real life you have to track simultaneously, like insurance, goods, customs clearance, things like that. But let me give you one thing to turn everything on its head. The internet is stateless, and we're looking at making it stateful. And what does that really mean? It means, an example, you go into a restaurant and order egg and chips. Waiter brings it to you and you say, I'd like some tomato ketchup. And the next waiter comes up and gives you the tomato ketchup, but he's got no recollection of what you got in front of him. So he doesn't ask you whether you want mustard or whatever. That's the internet. You go on the internet, you do one thing, and that's it. The statefulness comes from the apps at the moment. So if you're in England and you log on to somewhere, that app will be able to interact for you. You go to Belgium, that app will be able to interact for you. Now that's hidden within the app itself, that's statefulness. But do you really want the app doing that, or do you want to control it so that people have to ask you permission to get to your information? Is that something that is useful? Do we want to get to that so that we can actually control our own biometrics, our medical records, and who has access to them, and so on, so that we don't have the big firms like Google and Apple selling the information about us, because that would take everything away from it. So I'll leave that question with you.
I think that's a great one, because the other thing as well, this shows the power of personal information, because it may not necessarily be that you've ordered ketchup, but you may have ordered a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola, and for Pepsi or Coca-Cola to know about that becomes very powerful. And that's the kind of thing that they're willing to pay for, because they can then do things like offer an incentive of, we saw you had Coca-Cola last time, we'll give you a 10% discount if you buy it again, wherever. Lots of things with that. And that's where Stuart's right, that at the moment, the likes of Google control that data about you if you actually put it in the person's hands, so they own it, it then provides the ability for them to sell it themselves and so monetize it. So I did a bit of work a while ago about the whole concept of monetizing your personal data, which absolutely links in with that. So fascinating stuff there. Well,
And
sorry,
the
go
biggest
for it, JC.
problem, biggest problem we have is that the TCP/IP protocol, a TCP/IP protocol, and the whole internet is really not fit for purpose for what we're doing today. It was totally bastardized, and we're suffering from that today. It's as simple as that. If we want to really implement all of these things we are saying, and having sort of the decentralization and blockchain core concepts means we have to reinvent completely the internet. Actually, I had a co-founder before. Between both of us, we came up with a few ideas about that. He did most of it, but it will never happen, because using TCP/IP protocol and the way we have internet design means that it's easy for somebody to actually control anything that happens in it. And so even the ability, when you say you have control of your own data, you actually don't do it, don't have it. That's the problem.
Folks, conscious we're on the hour and need to wrap up on this, which is a shame. Although I didn't really want to go down the route of discussing the success or failure of IPv6 and other protocols now.
Centralized DNS and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. That would start making a lot of people fall asleep, and a lot of people get really excited for the techies amongst us. So, but I'm going to close off now. But just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined today. Really interesting conversation. We didn't really talk about crypto, but we did talk about blockchain, which is what I think is really interesting area. So I hope everyone enjoyed the session today. Some great insights there, and thank you everybody for contributing. For anyone who's listening who found it interesting, come along and join us next time. Because we hold these every Sunday evening. Everyone's welcome. So thanks everyone for contributing, and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Bye.